In this presentation, we will introduce the worksheet we will be using for our comprehensive partnership problem. For more accounting information and accounting courses, visit our website at accountinginstruction.info. Comprehensive problem that will be going over the standard journal entries, the adjusting process, the financial statements, and the closing process. This is going to be a long problem, but we're going to break it down into step-by-step components, so it won't be too bad as long as we go in this step-by-step format. This will be the worksheet we are working with. It looks a little bit intimidating, again, because it will be a big worksheet, but we'll just be looking at one component of it at a time. Our information will be over here on the left side. We will start off with entering our normal day-to-day type of transactions. We will enter those into our general journal. We will then post those to the general ledger over here, which will be used to create the trial balance. So we'll take a look now at a completed worksheet so we can get an idea of what we will be doing. Here's what we have. I'm going to make it a little bit smaller so the numbers will be smaller, but we can see more of it at one time. Now again, I know this worksheet looks intimidating, but we're just going to do this one small journal entry, debit and credit, at a time. And as we do that, we'll see how something like this can be put together and not be too bad once we go through it in that format. So this tab here, the Journal Entries tab, is where we're going to enter the day-to-day transaction. What happens during the month, for the most part, is to just enter normal transactions. This is the general journal. We will journalize the journal entry, which means just to make the journal entry into this general journal, which is just this blue area. And then we'll post each of these to the general ledger. So the general ledger is over here. For example, this item is being posted here. We can see it's connected over here. So all we did was make a simple reference, pulling that information over to the general ledger. Once we do that, then the general ledger will be used to create the trial balance. And it's going to happen automatically. So this number, for example, is being used to create the trial balance. And so that's how it's all going to be put together. We're going to be entering our data into the blue areas here as we go through this problem. And we'll just basically leave all the other areas alone. And those will be formulas that will be pre-set up for us. We'll do this in a step-by-step format. We'll have a new worksheet for each step. So if we mess something up, we can always go back and start right at where the each journal entry will be. So basically, we'll break out each journal entry, each component, and have another worksheet that will start just at that piece of the problem. Once we complete this component, we'll end up with a trial balance here. And this will take several steps because we will break these out journal entry by journal entry. But once we have that and we have this trial balance, it will then be in balance here, meaning the debits equal the credits. And we can tell that because we're representing not two columns on this trial balance, two columns over here on the journal entries, two columns over here on each of the GL accounts. However, those being debits and credit columns. The credit columns are also being represented with negative numbers for this worksheet. And I'm going to argue that that really simplifies the process of working through problems within a worksheet, really simplifies the type of formulas, really simple formulas we can use in a worksheet. So I'm going to argue for this type of format for it, meaning all credits are going to be negative numbers. One reason we can do that is the trial balance, for example, we can have it with just one column, debits being positive, credits being negative. And if we sum up the entire thing, the debits minus the credits equals 0. So that gives us a nice easy check for us to say, is something in balance? We're not checking two numbers to say if it's in balance. We could just check one number and just say it's 0. That means the debits minus the credits are 0. We also made it green, so if it's anything other than 0, it'll turn red, or at least non-green. And that'll be a check, very easily visual to see that something's wrong. Net income can also be calculated really easily. So we can just see net income is the credits minus the debits. So this isn't a loss, this is income, because we have to differentiate debits from credits, or debits and credits from plus and minus. For Excel, this is a negative number. For us, it's a credit because we're using debits and credits here. No matter what we do, we're going to have to get over that hurdle of understanding what we're adding and subtracting debits and credits, but we're not representing things in terms of a plus and minus format. There's no way getting around that. We're going to have two columns, one column, plus and minus numbers. We're going to have to add and subtract debits and credits So we might as well get used to using the format that's easiest to make calculations with. And so that's what we'll do here. We can also see our accounting equation very easily with this format. Notice this accounting equation lines up to this trial balance. All we did is sum up the assets, which add up to the assets, sum up the liabilities, flip the sign. So these are credits, and these are just liabilities, and then all of the equity. And again, just summing it up and flipping the sign will give us a very easy formula. All we're doing is adding these. If I just add up all of this, the credit minus the debit plus the credit minus the debit plus the credit minus the debit plus the credit minus the debit, debit, gives us the 118,100. And that's the 118,100 up here. So notice how easy it is. I can add and subtract the positive and negative numbers, which we see as credits minus the debits on the equity section, and it'll give us a nice total there without having to have a complicated formula with plus and minus in the formula. We can just use a sum function. So that's the argument for using this format. We'll see it as we go. We'll go through it step by step. Hopefully it'll make sense and make things as easy as possible. Once we have this trial balance done, we'll move to the adjusting entry tab. We'll move to the second tab. And of course, this will be the longest tab. This is where most of the data entry happens. Then we'll go to the adjusting entries. These will be entries that we will enter just to format our unadjusted trial balance, what we were at before, to any accrual adjustments we need, those that are planned to enter, so that we end up with an adjusted trial balance, one that has as close to as possible a perfect accrual system as we can, so that we can then use it to create our financial statements. We typically use a worksheet like this. Most textbooks will use this. Most people in practice will use a separate worksheet oftentimes for the adjusting process, because it really gives a very easy, quick example of these adjustments, as opposed to posting to the general ledger. For example, if we made an adjustment to supplies here, because there's only one account that's posting here, it's really nice to have just this simple 3-column worksheet. It's also really nice to only have 3 columns rather than 6 columns, which we would need if we made a debit and credit column for each of these, the unadjusted trial balance, the adjustments, and the adjusted trial balance. Once again, that argument being for having the debits be positive and the credits be negative in our worksheet. Very much simplifies the process. So as opposed to if we were talking about an entire month, we may have like 10 transactions here, and then this format would be less useful. That's why we need a general ledger. So if we only have a few transactions and we're trying to see what happens, especially with timing differences with the adjusting entries dealing with timing, having a nice quick worksheet like this, beginning balances, adjustments, ending balances, is great and typically what will be used. Once we have the adjusted trial balance, we will then create the financial statements. We're going to do that on a separate tab. So we will create from the adjusted trial balance the balance sheet, the income statement, and the statement of partners' equity. And so that's of course the end result. That's what we're trying to get to when we go through all the accounting process. We're trying to get to the financial statements. That's going to be what the end users will use in order to make decision-making processes. Once we're done with this information and made the financial statements for the month of January, we'll then do the closing process, which is really geared towards setting up the worksheet for the next time period. And it's also really important for us to know the closing process to be able to understand the relationship between temporary accounts and permanent accounts, to understand the capital accounts, how they work, especially with a partnership where we have to track capital accounts separately based on the different partners. And then we'll go to the closing process, and we'll do a 4-step closing process, which is kind of a traditional textbook type closing process. What we want to get from practice is we want to understand the textbook closing process so we can answer any questions, including understanding what the income summary account is, which will often be in textbook problems related to partnerships whenever we talk about breaking out the net income between partners. So we have to understand that, but we also want to understand just what the closing process is if we were working on any type of industry, and just understand the relationship. Like if we printed a report for the month of January and then we reprinted a report for the month of February, what would happen to the income accounts? What's happening to the capital accounts? If those things close out and roll over, we have to know what to expect and how to be able to then make comparisons between financial statements. In order to do that, We need to know the nature of the closing process, the nature of capital accounts, and doing the closing process helps with that. For more accounting information and accounting courses, visit our website at accountinginstruction.info.